Welcome to Hearts and Minds, a podcast that will help you to discover the extraordinary in your everyday life. Whether it's in your work, relationships, or your spiritual life, we discuss topics of faith and life in a way to suit the unspiritual and the devout alike. Today we're going to have a conversation about the topic of courageous conversations, because we all know that there are some conversations we all find hard, and as a result we can easily find reasons to avoid them. They're personal conversations, work conversations, all kinds of challenging conversations. Well, today our guest speaker, Maita Crowe, is going to plunge right into the topic of courageous conversations. Maita is a mum of 5, married to John, living in Glasgow. She has more than 20 years' experience of global sales professional, working in many multinational organisations. She's experience of developing people, extensive travel and working internationally, which have all given her this extraordinary awareness of various cultures, business practices, and the ability to leverage those differences to drive positive change. Maita enjoys working particularly with people to help them with self-awareness, team dynamics, and communication. And she has famously said on many occasions, one of the most satisfying outcomes for her as a professional and mother of 5 children is supporting, experiencing, and being part of and instrumental to the growth of people I work with and I am responsible for. So that's quite an introduction, Maita.
Thanks, Maura.
So
just
to say, we're delighted to have you, Maita, on our podcast this afternoon. So very welcome. So just as a start, how did you get into courageous conversations in the first place?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe. Might be the best point to start with.
Of course. Well, before I answer the question, thank you so much for inviting me as a guest. I'm really delighted to be here. And hopefully this podcast can help all the people who listen to this podcast in terms of becoming more courageous with their conversations with others, right? So going back to your question, Maura, how did I get into it? Well, no one wants to be in a courageous conversation. We can't avoid it. It happens all the time, whether we're at work, whether we're with our family, with friends, colleagues. So I suppose the answer is that throughout all my experience, in life, you come across it and you just got to deal with it. And of course, you don't get it right all the time. So you learn along the way how to make it much better. What techniques you can actually apply to make it a much better conversation with the other person. And I suppose along the years, what I've learned really is that when you hear the word courageous, a lot of people think it's being direct, being rude or blunt. It's actually the opposite, because the word courageous comes from the word kur, which is heart, and us is full of, right? So courageous really means full of heart. And what I've learned along the years is that when you are true to yourself and you really care about the other person that you're speaking with, it should come from the heart, because what you want to do is help your friend or help the other person.
Wow, that's a very attractive way of putting it. It's not like a cutting conversation, as you say, or a blunt conversation. It's a conversation that leads to more and leads to better,
Absolutely.
which I think is a very nice way to start. What makes conversations truly courageous then? Because as you just said there, the courageous conversations show up everywhere in our personal lives, in our work lives. Is it about honesty, or is it about vulnerability? Is it about listening? What is it about? What are the components of a courageous conversation, do you think?
Yeah, it's everything you mentioned there, but I suppose it's how you use it and when you use it, right? So, you mentioned about honesty. So, of course, a courageous conversation should be something that's very honest. Again, it comes from the heart, right? I suppose, though, when it comes to honesty, one has to really reflect, why are you having that courageous conversation? Is it because you want to get something off your chest? Is it because you want to complain or push someone under the bus? Then that's not courageous, right? That's actually the opposite, because you're trying to use the situation to prove a point, okay? Or you're very angry and you're very emotional, right? Courage is really about having a conversation where it's two-way. And if you put some principles together, I suppose there are four things I would recommend to people, right? One is, when you think of an iceberg, right, we see like probably 10% of the iceberg on top of the water. There's 95%, underneath the water that we don't see. And that's the same with people. When something happens, we only see that 10%. We don't know what's happening in that person's life, right? So when we have a courageous conversation, I would suggest that you bring up what you see, what we call observable, right? So that that person, you can't start bringing things that you assume or that you're guessing, right? It has to be something that you can see, right, on the surface. Then, to help you with that conversation, it's also about being specific. What in particular are you talking about, right? Sometimes when we're very emotional, we start bringing in the past, we start bringing everything into the conversation. But for that specific time, you have to be really exact in terms of, what is it you're wanting, or what is it you're saying to that person? Then it has to be balanced as well, and then that's a bit hard. And that's where I talk about taking a step back, really reflecting, why are you having that conversation? Are you trying to help or not? If you're trying to blame, then that's not balanced at all, right? And lastly, it's being active. It's being active in and that's the hard bit, being active in listening. Because usually in a courageous conversation, it's natural. You just want to kind of offload everything. Whereas you have to listen to what the other person is saying. And it's not hearing, it's listening and understanding. It's listening. And listening is not only with the ears, it's observing. What's their reaction? What are they trying to say? And take that noise away from your head. Because it's normal, right? When someone's talking to you, you already are thinking of a response. So it's quite a discipline, actually. And that's why I said earlier, over the years, you learn how to do it better and better. However, you have to do it, right? And learn from the mistakes you do. Because a lot of people kind of find it scary, so they don't want to do it. If you don't do it, then there's no practice, right? So I think the first thing is, how do you launch into, getting that being brave enough to do it. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose what you say there is thinking a lot about it, that there is a lot of pre-work to be done beforehand,
Yeah.
And also, I don't know, it struck me once before, I heard somebody say that it's not about just the conversation. It can be many conversations, because you have to set it up or, establish a bit of trust or, open things out a little, respecting the other person. And of course, that thing of listening, of course, hearing and listening, as you say, are two different things, which of course is fascinating. We tend to just hearing what's said as opposed to hearing what's not said, which is really interesting. Of course, we can all avoid tough conversations, and I think we can all probably think of the ones we've avoided. And oftentimes it's because we're tired or because we're upset or we're afraid of hurting the person. You talked about there, just mentioned, Maita, the importance that these conversations are had. Yeah. What's the cost of avoidance?
Well, so I would say that the cost of avoidance, there are multiple things that can happen, right? One is, well, I guess let's go one step back. Why is it so difficult, right? Because that's the reason why we're avoiding it, right? So I think the primary one is people try to avoid it because they're worried that it might affect or harm the relationship you have with the other person, right? So let's say in a work situation where you're going to give feedback to either someone who works in your team, or you're giving feedback to your manager or a work colleague. It's kind of scary, right? Because you think, well, if I give this, then what will happen to me, right? Or if you're really good friends, with your best friend, and you want to give a feedback, if you're really, really close, I would say that the person should understand, because the trust and the relationship is there. But there's still that wee 10% where you think, ooh, what if she takes it against me, and then we're not going to be good friends anymore, right? So that's the primary reason why people don't want to do it. It's harming the relationship, right? So the cost of avoidance, though, is that if you don't do that, is you can our mind is very tricky. When we don't have the answer, or we see something's happening and we don't confront the person or have the conversation with the person, then our mind starts making things up in our head because we don't have the facts, right? So an example is that if maybe a work colleague who smiles at you all the time, maybe you're in a meeting and you said something that you thought the person didn't like. Then the next time you see that person, she or he doesn't smile at you, immediately we think, oh wow, they're angry at me, or oh, they're not going to talk to me again because I mentioned this that might affect him or her and all that stuff. And we start making these things up. Whereas what we don't know is that person probably was just having a bad day, or maybe got a phone call, there was a problem in the house or something. And, they just didn't see you, so they didn't smile, right? So, and then that harms the relationship. That's the cost of avoidance, because that little voice keeps on niggling in your head. And then whatever that person says, you kind of interpret it wrongly. Then suddenly what really wasn't an issue becomes an issue, because if you start acting funny to this person, then the person might also think, oh, why is this person acting like this? Then starts putting things in their head, right? So it's actually more harm if you try to avoid, that conversation, right? Then the second piece I would say is like another hard bit is, especially in a work environment, is feedback, especially when it comes to performance reviews. And, it's either you're the one giving the feedback to someone who works with you, or you're giving feedback to your manager, right? Again, if you're the manager and you're trying to get the best out of the people working in your team, and you want them to be the best they can be so that their careers can develop, then the cost of avoidance is that you are not helping that person. And that person will never learn that they could be better in what they're doing, or, that what they're doing probably is not the right way of working. So it's actually helping them. Yes. So,
and it's true, you never forget, when people give you good feedback. I think because you realize it costs a lot, but you also realize she was so right. If you're trying hard, you want to improve professionally and grow and things like that. So it's amazing how we can read that so wrong. What about, leaders who maybe have to give a lot of feedback out there, or, and they just fear confrontation? Like, a lot of people struggle with confrontation, and they just avoid conflict at all costs and want to keep everybody happy, and end up just, you might say, taking a lot on themselves as a result. What kind of advice would you give to that kind of personality?
I would say that for leaders who don't want confrontation, or who don't want to give that feedback, is that there's a couple of things, right? So their team or the team they lead actually has different kinds of personalities and different people who are all contributing, right, towards the success of the team. So if they don't give that feedback, then I would say you would find that the team dynamic probably would not be as, I would say, as solid, because they're all individually working in different levels. But if one person, let's say, is not pulling their weight, and that leader is not giving that person feedback, then the other people in the team will actually be under pressure to deliver, right? And the people in the team will know that one member or two members are not pulling their weight. So that causes a lot more, I would say, bad feelings, So it's going to escalate, right? So I would say that leaders in that situation, they have to. They have to. And the more they practice giving feedback, then it should get better. But I think you're right. People are scared, right? But I'll also bring in a different spin to this, because normally when we say feedback, a lot of people think immediately it's negative or not good feedback, right? So feedback can be very positive as well. So for these managers, I would say that they should give positive feedback to their teams. And maybe that's the way of practicing. Start with, okay, complimenting people for what they're doing, pointing out all the things that are going well. And then probably using some of the techniques I mentioned earlier. Like, if things aren't going well, if, let's say, they're scared that it might hurt someone's feelings, or they're gonna someone in the team will be demotivated, as an example. I think they really have to look at the techniques for giving feedback, but at the same time, there are, I would say, frameworks that they could use that kind of de-escalates the emotional piece, right? A lot of times in feedback, what people are scared about is emotional backlash. We're only human. If we don't like hearing, a lot of people don't like hearing, oh, you're not doing a good job, right? There's pride involved in our work. So for these types of leaders, if they use a framework that kind of helps them navigate through that feedback, then they go through again, pointing out exactly what's observable in that person's work, what the impact is on the team or the team members, and again, what they could do differently, right? And actually, when it comes to that feedback, the manager and the person they're actually giving feedback to can even think of a resolution or how to improve it together, right? So it's back to what you said more about, it has to be open communication, it's honest. It's not just one person telling someone across the table what they think. It's an open communication between two people. There's a lot of active listening, a lot of engagement between two, right? So, yeah.
And as you say, you're involved the person in the solution, which is hugely positive. I've also heard people talk about, courageous conversations as something that can motivate us when we find them hard, is thinking, I really want this person to grow.
Yeah.
And you don't see yourself. You only see yourself as you see yourself, but you don't see how other people see you. So it's helping that sort of, you mind that kind of an all-rounded sort of picture of the person, and helping them to see how other people see, and sort of roadblocks and things like that, helping people to sort of take them out and to work at them. Another thing, just from your own point of view, Maita, because you've had a lot of professional experience in this field, is there a story, from your own life where, you had to engage with a courageous conversation, whether to receive it or to give it? Do you want to share that with us, and what did you learn from it?
Absolutely. So there's many stories I can think of, but I think the one that I'll share is in one of the companies I worked for. My role was to deal with the Asia Pacific part of the world, or I would say developing countries. So it was Asia Pacific, Latin America, some other parts of Africa, and really proud of what I did. The sales were coming in. I was bringing in business partners. And the company hired a new person who was from Holland. So the person was Dutch. And, you can't see him in screen now, but this guy was like twice my height, very, very tall Dutchman, as they all are. And the Dutch are known in their culture to be very, very direct. They say it as it is. And that's how, that's how we know them to be. So we were both given a joint project to make some changes for the business and to pull a team together, which we did. So we did it together, and a lot of it probably I did before this person was hired. But in the big meeting itself, with all the bigwigs of the company, this person acknowledges and all the people who contributed, because he was the one closing, and he didn't mention my name, right? So I was really very angry. I wasn't happy at all. And of course, the first thing going through my head was, okay, this guy wants my job. He's trying to prove himself. All the negative things you can think of. And I was really angry. So, but like anything, how I dealt with it is, okay, I'm angry. Okay, just, I know make it sound easy, but during that time, I can feel my blood boiling now just speaking about it, right? So I said, okay, just calm down. And usually, I think that's one thing. It's the relaxing techniques, especially if you're emotional. So for me, I go for a walk, or, I pray. So, I go to the side and I keep my mind and I pray. So there's a couple of techniques I use just to calm down. And then I thought, okay, I have to talk to this guy, right? Because one is, that's wrong, what he did. And second is, I have all these things going through my head and I have to find out why he didn't mention my name, right? Now, I make it sound easy, but this probably went on for a week, right? Of emotional roller coasters. And, it was horrible. And I used one of the frameworks, that I mentioned earlier around, how do I give feedback so that it's objective, what is observable, what is specific, and all these things. So I did. I prepared really well, and I wrote it down so that I don't, go overboard with my emotion. And I did call him, and I said, hey, can I speak with you? And of course he said, yeah. He goes, what's up? And so I told him exactly, that when you acknowledge people and you mention all the contributors, you didn't mention my name. So by not mentioning my name, I felt and thought XYZ. So I told him exactly. I felt that you weren't valuing me. You were pushing me aside. You were disregarding everything I listed it down. And I said that by doing that, it made me feel XYZ. So, I brought up my anger, some of the emotions. And then I said, and in the future, it would have been helpful if you said that, well, Maita was, so I also laid out to him how it would have panned out, how I would have wanted it to pan out. And he looked at me and I thought, oh my gosh, what's going to be next? He's going to tower over me like this Dutchman. And he said, wow, he said, Maita, because I did not even think about that. I did not realize I didn't mention your name. He goes, I was just nervous, that I probably just missed it, right? Then, of course, I got the emotions saying, how can you miss it? Like, I'm the one that did this and did that and that. So we had that conversation, but he was very apologetic. And he said, look, I will never, ever do that again. I go, yeah, you better not. Right? Of course, by the time we were laughing already and bantering, right? And we became really, really good friends and very good partners in the business. I think it was also, maybe he respected the fact that I was very open to him. And I felt good after, because everything, sure, all that rubbish in my head for one whole week that kept on going around, and all the feelings of anger and everything, it just went away. and so we developed a good relationship, a good trust. And I knew that if something came up, I didn't even have to look at the framework because we established that, then I could say things, direct
to him.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting you say that you got it all out. We're typically, what happens when we don't get things out? Gossip, complaining, and it just creates very toxic environments where then you start layering up again, interpreting things that aren't there, because we haven't, we all see things so differently. There's just no two ways about it. Just maybe when you're coming to an end now, but just to ask you a question about women specifically, we come to courageous conversations differently to men. We have our attributes, maybe there's a more maternal approach, a person-focused approach, you would hope. I'm not saying men don't have that, but we also have challenges that are unique to ourselves. How would you suggest as women we can navigate these challenges and at the same time use our unique attributes, whatever those happen to be, to really have very effective, courageous conversations?
Yeah, I would say that you're right, that there are women that we have qualities which are probably a little bit different from men. Although what I would say the more is that it's difficult to, well, for one thing, I'll be honest, I don't have any, I would say, factual data that says it's, different for women or more or easier, difficult and everything. But of course, what I do know is that, as you said, women probably are more emotional. We're more maternal as well. So maybe the approach to courageous conversation will be slightly different in the sense that there are some qualities which allow us to use our heart more than our head, right? So one, that could be an advantage in the sense that we could be more empathetic and more understanding. But at the same time, it could also be a negative in the sense that it could prevent us from going forward because we're empathizing immediately without even laying out the facts, right? But I suppose that I think I can only say in my experience, the directness of, let's say, colleagues I've had who were men, they could be very direct and not think about what the emotional impact may be, right? For women, we have that, and that's a gift, right? Because again, courage comes to the heart, right? So it's not, I always tell this to everyone, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And for women, I think that's our strength. It's how we say things. So we could be saying exactly the same thing. It could be very direct, but it's maybe our voice or our actions, or you can feel it, right? So it's the how and the manner, which is where we are very different. And I think it's a better different actually from men.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Maita, just before we finish, to ask, for our listeners, what are maybe 3 practical steps, our listeners could take from today's podcast to start, embracing maybe courageous conversations as a way of growing or deepening in their relationships and really supporting each other to grow, because we really help each other to grow when we give genuinely heartfelt feedback in a loving way.
Yeah. So I think the first one for me is based on everything you said. It's how do we create that culture of having an open communication, and it comes with friendship, it comes with trust, it comes with the relationship. When you have that and we establish that, then we can be as honest as possible, as transparent as possible, right? So it was interesting. The other day I was having a call with a really, really good friend who's in another country, and we were speaking about friendship. And, the conversation was, this person asked me, so if I tell you exactly what I think, are you going to get angry? I said, absolutely not. I said, I would expect that from you. And I would be actually more hurt if you don't tell me as it is, because I expect that from a friend, right? So if you can get to that sort of level of relationship, whether it's a friend, a family member, a work colleague, someone in your team, then that's great, right? But to be able to do that, you have to work on the relationship and the trust. That's a key thing. The second one is, I would say, it's preparation, and it's preparation. So it's managing emotions, but to manage the emotions and having a conversation, you need the preparation, right? So if you prepare, then you can help that, have heart and mind together. But if it comes to emotional, it's also finding techniques how to step back, how to take deep breaths. I was sharing that, my son, my 15-year-old son, I tend to tell him to do things in the house. And like any mother, it's like, oh, please do this, please do this. Then suddenly there's 5 tasks. And and I see him, he goes, he takes a deep breath, and I think, oh no, well, good on him. He doesn't get angry, but I know he's exasperated and angry. But he takes a deep breath. That's how he copes, and I think we can learn from that. When we're very emotional, just how do you take that deep breath and just control, or maybe say, look, I need to step out for a while. Go for a walk, something. And then the last bit, which we touched on earlier, was I really believe that being active in all sense of the word, the listening, the engagement, I think it's showing genuine interest in what the other person's saying, some gestures that you're understanding and validating, right? Because the person might not like what you're saying, and the person might respond. But it's validating that that person is feeling, has feelings, and they can be emotional too, right? So, and it doesn't have to be by words, it could be a nod or some gestures you're doing, right? So I think those are the 3 things which could really make a difference and help us in our courageous conversations.
Wonderful, Maita. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast this afternoon. And just for our listeners, you mentioned some frameworks and things like that, so we might include some resources at the end of the podcast, just to help our listeners maybe to take this a step further.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Maita. And also just to say as well to our listeners, we always love to hear feedback from you, maybe topics you'd like us to delve into a little more, whether with our guests or in our other podcast series. Obviously, that's exactly where we want to be. So thank you very much, Maita, for joining us. Always a pleasure. And I'll just say we just had Maita with us on our Hearts and Minds overnight. So for those of you who were lucky enough to be at that this month actually, only 2.5 weeks ago, feels like a long time ago. It was really, really wonderful because we had lots of time to discuss this topic in depth, and a lot of people in the audience felt very comfortable sharing, obviously, their own experiences of courageous conversations, which really made it a very rich conversation. So it was really wonderful. So thank you, Maita, for that as well. Okay, so we'll be talking to you again soon, and stay tuned, listeners. Looking forward to being with you again.